Evan Woodard calls himself an urban explorer. For him, the smallest piece of trash can tell you much about the past and the present. He travels to unlikely places to rescue artifacts left behind centuries ago. And then he brings these objects back to life.
Watching Indiana Jones run from a boulder and getting the idol and all that, that was my first interest in history, and seeing that and understanding that there's so much more out there in the world to be explored. It's a hands-on kind of history, not so much something you're just reading from a book. I did not go to school for archaeology or to study history or anything like that. This was something that I've always been interested in. I loved history as a kid, and then now I get to live that life, and it's taking me places that I never thought I would get to go. And I get to explore all sorts of cool things and unearth really cool artifacts. I'm Evan Woodard, and I operate the Instagram account Salvage Ark. And here in Baltimore, I excavate outhouses along with lead magnet fishing around the harbor. So Salvage Ark started back in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. I did not want to do bread baking or anything else like what other people were doing. So I got out in the woods and started hiking. It was safe, it was socially distant and all that. And I came across some old bottles that I thought were really cool, and I had always loved antiques as a kid. So I started picking them up and doing the research, and I made a new Instagram account just to post those instead of my dog photos. So these were old beer bottles from the turn of the century, so very early 1900s, some of them even the 1800s. Once I started doing the research, I learned there's a whole community around these people that actually go out there hunting for these artifacts. I wanted to tell a bigger story, not just what the artifacts are, but what the story is behind them, who made them, how they get to America, what was their whole story, and make it a personal thing. So I excavate privies, so those are old outhouses. And here in America, before we had indoor plumbing, people had to use the bathroom somewhere. So they often just had these large holes in their backyard that they would, go and do their business in. But they also doubled as your trash can, basically, because you did not have public trash pickup until after World War I. And so all your household trash was just tossed into these holes. And so that's how we can kind of learn about who lived at the house, what their story was. Did they have kids? Were they sick? What were their issues? When you find syringes, you can tell if they had a disease or something. What was could they read and write? And it's just the smallest little piece of the trash can tell you the biggest piece of information. A lot of the artifacts that I pull out, they were all produced during the industrial age. So they were on a mass production line, and they're pretty well documented. And so there's databases and documents showing some of the older stoneware, porcelain, all those items. And nowadays you can look through the internet and actually find these databases out there showing who the manufacturer was in the UK, and then trace everything back. So once you put everything back together, you can look at the pieces, you can look at the patterns, the colors, and you know exactly when it was made, by who, and what factory it came from. There was a huge community of people that used to dig privies back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s, but as they got older, the community shrank. And now to the point where those people are still interested in the artifacts, but they are unable to dig anymore. So I'm trying to breathe new life into this community to continue it to keep going. Otherwise, it's just gonna be a dying art, and then all these sites will get destroyed, unfortunately.
Matt Palmer. I live here in Baltimore, 42 years old. I'm an engineer, and I dig for bottles. The medicine and poisons to me are really interesting. It's very common to find opium bottles. Poison bottles is very common also for rat poison and pest control for public health reasons. They had their own patent molds, different than these, so this is a very standard kind of mold for like a perfume. And you know, in the dark, if you were reaching for a bottle, you would definitely want to differentiate the poisons from other types of bottles so you didn't have an accidental poisoning. So all these patents came out prior to electricity with little bumps, ridges, other unique sort of tactile things that you could feel in the dark so you wouldn't accidentally drink poison if you were sick.
Oh, you got a pipe.
Oh, nice. Baltimore is known for being very friendly. Like, we are a very welcoming city despite what a lot of people hear about us. A lot of the major and larger helpful things here in the city are driven by, humans that started it out by themselves and then just kept growing and growing and growing it until it became like a larger thing. People are passionate about helping out in the community, and if you make it accessible and fun, they're more than willing to do it. The privy digging crew, a bunch of my friends, we worked very tightly together. We have to keep it small, but when it comes to magnet fishing, we could open up to the public. And that's one of the main reasons I really started driving for this, because I do want more people to get involved with saving history, finding it, and then also just cleaning up our environment. So I thought, well, I can buy a magnet for relatively cheap. I don't see anyone doing this here in Baltimore, and I've got a lot of water to play with. So I just went out, and one thing led to the next, and I think 3 weeks later I held my first magnet fishing meetup, and it's just, taken off since then. You can see right away that you're actually having an impact by the trash that you're pulling out. There's no waiting around. You're not waiting for like a test or anything to come back. You see the scooter or whatever you pulled out of the harbor, right away you know you've done your job and you've done it well. Artifact-wise, I've definitely pulled out some really cool things. One of the cooler ones is a shipping hook from the mid-1800s. And this is, as you can see, it's laminated, it's hand-hammered, and it's all pure iron. So that's kind of cool that this was able to survive that long underneath the water, buried in the harbor, and kind of protected by the muck that was down there, which is really deep. I think it's cool, and I don't want to get rid of it. It's a cool piece of history. We now live in a society where a lot of trash is created and thrown away real quickly, but back then things were, highly valuable and they were cherished items. And I think that's important. I think that everything deserves to have its story told. Putting a story and almost a face to everything, people can understand it and it's relatable to them. If you went to a museum right now and you just saw a bottle on the wall and it said bottle 1830s, you're like, okay, cool. But if I sit there and tell you who made it, it was made by John Chapman, who went on to become the mayor of Baltimore, and this is what he did in his life, you're like, oh, I know where Baltimore is. I know what a mayor now. And you can kind of understand it, and it fits into that context is there so that you remember it and you can recite it later if you need to. Someone messaged me last week, was like, it's amazing you've gotten a group of people to get out there and actually get dirty with the water when other companies have been trying for so long to do this and make it interesting, and you've taken it and done it in 3 months. And so that's showing that there's interest in doing it. It's just about how you approach it and how you're going to do it to get people involved.
Hold it.
People do want to be able to swim in the harbor at some point, and if you can have a direct impact in that, I think that's great. There's water everywhere on our planet, so my goal is to get as much of the metal out of there as possible.